Okay, welcome to Musical Talk. This week we're doing an uncut episode coming to you from the Apollo Victoria Theatre in Victoria in London. And this week there's no editing, there's no theme music. Nick and I are really busy, we haven't got time to edit, so these are going to be the raw reactions to the production in July of Wicked. Now, the reason I've got this assignment, and you'll hear later on from Lisa, who has a slightly different background when it comes to this particular show, but I'm not a great fan necessarily of Wicked. I've really only ever heard the score a couple of times before from the album, and I have yet to form an assessment of the stage show because I've never seen it. So as a sort of Wicked virgin, as it were, I'm going in to give my reactions from my seat, hopefully, once we're inside. One observation to make, first of all, actually, before we even get into the theatre, is that there's a lot of school groups coming down today. I'm seeing this at the Wednesday matinee, so it's quite interesting to consider which particular curriculum subject this musical supports. From the accounts that I've heard, it may be something to do with politics, because there's supposed to be a political backstory to the story we're about to see. I may be wrong. We'll see. Maybe there's a whole home economics angle to it. I can just see Darren's arriving, so just in time, and we'll go into the auditorium. We've now made it into the auditorium. Darren is here. Say hello, Darren.
Hello.
And we're confronted by a set. Now, I have seen this set in pictures before, so this is not all a total surprise to me. Big dragon gazing out over the audience at the top, sort of silver mechanical dragon. Not quite sure whether that will come to life later. We'll see. And a lot of cogs surrounding things. Now, the last time I was here, it was Starlight Express. When I was aged 14, it was my 14th birthday, and it was a wonderful outing, but a very insubstantial musical. So maybe we'll see how this one compares. Just for balance, by the way, in case you're wondering about the opinions I'm going to give about this, we're going to have Lisa later on, who's going to review the performance we have on July the 15th, who is a big fan of the show. So if you're worried that I'm erring on one side, then we'll see which side she errs on. Darren, do you know anything about the show?
I don't, actually. I know nothing at all.
What, anything at all? Any expectations?
Only that I've heard it's very good, but I don't really have much more than that. I'm coming quite blindly to this.
I think, other than the set, really, I can't see very much. It's a very packed performance. I mentioned earlier, there's lots of school groups, lots of young people here. Oh, in the centre of the stage, or in front of where we're looking, I should say, there's a big map, at the centre of which is a glittering green emerald city, surrounded by such things as Gillikin Country and Winky Country, I should say. What's interesting about the map, well, I recognise the map certainly from the film itself, The Wizard of Oz. I understand from the episode we had with Martin Ball, who will be appearing in this show we're about to see, that there are certain legal constraints around this, because the MGM film of The Wizard of Oz is not something that the authors and the producers have access to, but obviously the original novels, L. Frank Baum's stories, are what it's all based on. So they have to be, everything you see here will be kind of authentic L. Frank Baum, as it were, or at least based on, as opposed to being based on the MGM film. I think that's probably all I can say about the experience so far. So probably come back to you in the interval and let you know what I made of the first act. I do happen to know how the first act ends, by the way. So I shall be fully braced for that high note. Anyway, I'll come back to you at the interval. That's the fairly ecstatic reaction to Defying Gravity. Curtain's just coming down on Act 1 of Wicked. Very long first act, I have to say, but a pretty exciting one. The last thing I saw, of course, that was of this scale was The Lord of the Rings, which listeners, long-term listeners may recall I didn't think much of. Well, this is a lot more pleasant to watch, and I think one of the things is that the bombastic nature of it, to a certain extent, and the very moneyed nature of it, does suit the subject matter a little bit more. So it's much more permissible to have slightly cutesy concepts. I mean, for example, like Madame Morrible's Mrs. Malaprop resemblance. She sort of seems to be a version of that character from Sheridan. Obviously, hugely visually impressive. Darren, have you got thoughts about the overall affect of the thing?
Yeah, I think visually, it's very interesting visually. I feel like that makes up for for a lot of it. The fact that it looks so good. I like the set. I like the way the sets change in between. I don't know really. There's a good use of costumes and what they denote for the characters as well. Sort of very basic way of telling whose side you're on or who you're watching at any one time.
There's a certain... I mean, obviously this is a big tourist show, I mean, as well as all the domestic fans that it has, and, there's a certain amount of signalling they therefore have to do to make sure that even if you're not following every single word... the miking was pretty good, actually, by the way, and, I did get most of the words. I had heard the score before. I'm pleased to report the dragon came to life, although the cogs didn't. Yes, momentarily at the beginning we had, and I think he also, during the wizard scene... Interesting that Nigel Planer, who's playing the wizard... does an American accent.
He does, but that's because he's George Bush for the purposes of this.
Yeah, I wondered about that. There is a sort of, I mean, it was pretty subtle. I almost missed it, but a slight sort of topicality. Well, I didn't think it was topicality. I thought it was just a sort of trope more than a topical thing.
I think one of the things with this is that there are so many. They've really tried to fill up as much space as they can with meaning. It began almost like a high school. Unpopular kid at school. If you remember, if you saw the Emma remake Clueless, where they transported to a high school, it reminded me of that.
Well, there's High School Musical as well, which we try not to talk about on this program.
High School Musical, which I unfortunately haven't seen. And then this story, almost sort of this anti-totalitarian story with the teacher being removed, came in and. Seemed very strong all of a sudden. There's a very strong message out of nowhere, and then Nigel Planer,
yes,
as the wizards.
I must admit, because I'm not of a high school sort of age, I wasn't really getting too wound up in the high school stuff, and I was therefore quite relieved actually when they started. There was a bit of politics.
Yes, I was really glad actually when they moved to Oz and that story came. It's what I expected the show to be, was this darkness. So I thought there'd be a much sharper element of that. But I found this really sort of fluffy story about a high school not fitting in, being unpopular, the popular girl learning her lesson. It all just seemed very inconsequential, but it just seemed to jar almost from that move to Oz. It was very, very sudden, and the last 15 minutes or so suddenly went onto this.
Yeah, more action adventure and the final parts of it, and more into sort of traditional magic territory. I mean, some observations I've written down here. It's very hard not to like Elphaba. That's all set up very well. So I suppose if the inconsequential stuff has a purpose, you could argue that that's what it is. It's there. She's kind of in the Harry Potter mould in the sense that she's so totally put upon. Everybody hates her. It's very hard not to sympathise. One thing I was a little concerned about was the disability politics in this, and I think this is something I'm going to talk to Matt Fraser about when we have him on the show, who's the creator of Thalidomide, the musical. We do get a description of Nessa having the first happy night of my life, because she's disabled and therefore it's impossible that she should ever have had a happy night. I know this is a mythological story and maybe I'm being a little bit pedantic, but
no, it is a mythological story, but they've decided to put these issues in there, so I think they should be defensible.
Yeah,
they're not really.
I couldn't defend that. I thought that was an outdated piece of politics about that. I noticed that I think this has often been pointed out, but Unlimited, which is in the I Want song, the very early one, that Elphaba has. I think there was a little bit of a borrow from Harold Arlen and the main theme of Somewhere Over the Rainbow. First bit, interesting character observation. Obviously, very easy to be wowed by the production because the production is extremely not only expensive but also highly competent, and it's still looking very polished. I mean, we're quite a way into the run now, but I did wake up when we got into some sort of politics and some stuff that I would perhaps unfairly regard as substantial. I love some of the lines. Black is this year's pink. Some of the jokes are being a bit lost on the audience. There's some quite cynical or some quite smart, at least witty, sort of almost American sitcom type of humour.
Yeah.
And I think some of it's going over well, some of it less so.
Yeah, I agree. I thought there'd be a bigger laugh on the little echo of Wizard of Oz, the was it lemons and melons and pears?
Yeah, oh my.
I wonder how many people have seen the Wizard of Oz.
Yeah, you have. It's the kind of thing where I don't know how many of this audience will have. It's actually fairly well balanced. I said earlier it's lots of school groups, but it's not all really. There's actually a fair mixture. Not too many people in the middle age groups.
I'm surprised to hear so many people cheer after songs, and it's almost like being at a gig where people hear a song they really like and then they cheer afterwards.
I think it kind of does have that effect. Like there'll be people here who've seen it like 15 times and. Yeah. who know the whole score backwards and stuff. Interesting decision by Elphaba. Now, I haven't actually checked who's playing Elphaba today, so I'm going to check that later and report. But she's doing an English accent for it, as far as I can tell. Or
I thought it was an Irish accent, a light Irish accent for Elphaba, and I thought that fit her character very well. Well,
that would explain the dark R's that we've got in some of the songs, because I thought, is she kind of doing it like you want to hear it because it's like that on the album, because, Idina Menzel, American, but maybe not. The dancing through life sequence, which actually, does a lot of work in terms of what it does. It sets up Fiyero as this very shallow person who he obviously isn't going to be quite so much later. I found that, I think that was probably the number I felt least during, I have to say. I think that was kind of, again, inconsequential is obviously the whole point of the number, but but then again, it kind of was maybe inconsequential in a particularly inconsequential way.
To be honest, the only song that really stuck in my head was, I imagine it's called Popular, the one between Elphaba and Glinda. And that was probably the scene I enjoyed the most, when it was just the two of them bouncing off each other with their very, very different personalities, which came over in the song, but also in the way they performed it. A lot of the songs I'm finding a little bit light, a little bit fluffy, but the performances are really helping. I think Glinda, the way she performs in this very cynical appropriation of what is seen to be good, is saving a lot of it.
Yes, I love what Helen Dallimore was saying as Glinda, and it really is a barnstorming performance. And there are some slightly different decisions from what I heard on the original score. She's much more of a cheerleader type of archetype in that, and it's more in the Bring It On territory. Here she's doing a slightly more ditzy English type of performance, not profoundly different, but definitely her own interpretation, which is actually quite a relief. One of the things that I was a little bit afraid of was that it would be a clone of the album, and that effectively, the expectation would be, the audience wants to see the same cookie cutter Disney type, show wherever it is in the world, the sort of McDonaldization of musicals, which a lot of people don't like. There's a lot of stuff in it which you can see as the actor's own interpretation, and indeed it's not all totally everybody trying to replicate the American production. Wonderful performance. It's always a pleasure to watch Nigel play, and I'm always irresistibly reminded of Nicholas Craig, his alter ego. I think probably those are the main thoughts I've got about Wicked. I think the main thing that I wrote down here as a sort of overall view is and the Wizardmania musical, I think, is the kind of key to this, that they do in the One Short Day in the Emerald City number. It's quite slightly justified, that show, but of course what it's doing is it's reflecting the audience's experience back to them. They've had one short day possibly in London. They're coming down to see a show, and presumably originally this would have been on Broadway. And there they are, two teenage girls in London going to see, or in the Emerald City in this case, going to see a show. And I thought there was a very strong feeling of wanting to reflect the audience's experience back to it in a very idealised form. And that's the reason, of course, therefore, why the fans of this show are famously, they tend to be the teenage girls. I don't know if that... Did you feel alienated from the demographic?
I did. I'm not really in touch with my teenage girl. It's and certainly that early part, the fact that it seems so based on high school politics, which I think and British school kids now are much more in tune with that, not only because of films and sort of appropriating that, but also because that's how school seems to be going in this country now. School's
a bit 80s actually, but I think that's an observation that's been made often before. And the other final note I'll make is that I was very pleased, as I always am, to see a bit of digital projection going on in the very opening sequence. We had an animation of Elphaba. That's the geek in me, the theatrical geek, enjoying some of the presentational aspects. Good band, great arrangements, by Bron, of course, Nick's favourite arranger. I have a few more conclusions after the second. It'd be interesting. Where do you think the second act's going to go, actually, before we finish on this bit?
Hopefully it's going to keep that dark aspect that it hit just in that last 15 minutes. I assume, in terms of storyline, we're going to get what happens next to Elphaba, how she develops as either as a misunderstood good person or as an out-and-out bad person, depending on where they decide to take it. I'm not sure yet.
Yeah, well, it's got to dovetail with the events of the Wizard of Oz, and yes, it'll be interesting to see. I think the end of the first act does sort of blow it open a lot, really, because suddenly the world that we've been introduced to, clearly she can't go back there, so we're going to get a big change. Whether they'll lead off in the first number of the second act, which I've now forgotten what it is, I don't know. So we'll see. That was the reaction of the crowd as Wicked comes to an end. Again, a few moments to think about it, and we'll give you some thoughts on the second half. But very enjoyable, and of course, for some of the audience, the inevitable standing ovation. Okay, finally sat down with a cup of tea, which was much appreciated after the second half of Wicked. Overall, I mean, it's a tremendously impressive bit of stagecraft, certainly, and got a few notes here on the second act that I took as we were going through. One was that it's traditional in all musical theatre to begin your second act by not continuing the story you finished immediately on the end of the first act, and in fact to just sort of have something that's almost a diversion. And they kind of go into this big celebration thing, which was definitely a bit of a diversion. One of the things I've sort of put as an overall comment as well on the thing is that one of the shows that I kept thinking of during it, other than The Wizard of Oz, of course, obviously, was Into the Woods. And the reason I think it works on that same level is because it's about the introduction of a sort of, well, a certain moral complexity into what is basically a fairy tale scenario. And so it's the same kind of appeal as that show, really. In other words, it's the stories that are comforting, but given a slight, morally complex edge. There's a few interesting things there. We did get a bit of a recurrence of the politics. The Wizard's number, Wonderful, basically puts forward this notion that history is told by the victors, and that it's all about reputation, really, which I suppose kind of complements Popular in the first half. It's all about Popular. So you've got a bit of a thematic through line going on there. We also had, of course, the romantic becoming of Elphaba through that ballad with Fiyero, and again, you can see why it's there just for this moment. I found it, I'm afraid, like quite a bit of the score, I found it just a little bit generic and bland, if I must be honest. Performed beautifully, of course, and I mustn't say anything rude about the cast, but I think the material is not something that was very easy to make something spectacular out of. Although I really did thrill to No Good Deed, the big number for Elphaba in the second half. At the end, it gets a bit slushy, although in fairness, that is a criticism that's also levelled at Into the Woods. Massively appreciative audience. Darren, as a Wicked Virgin, what did you make of the second half?
It didn't go quite where I wanted it to. I was hoping it would elaborate more on that sort of that darker edge that we saw towards the end, and then it didn't. Of course, we had this very, very light. It was great. Let's have a celebration, apropos of nothing. And then I hoped it would go into this darker territory, and it didn't really. The darkest character really in the second half was Nessa. Who suddenly turned into someone quite nasty.
It was Joan Crawford, wasn't it?
It was Joan Crawford, yeah. She's the governor now, and we don't forget it. And she gets the ability to walk, and it doesn't do her any favours, as perhaps we would think it would do. I didn't feel, although obviously it's going into this moral complexity, I still didn't feel there was enough substance there. So although they brought up this moral complexity, they didn't do anything with it, and I still think that the Wizard of Oz itself, the film, there's a lot more going on with it. There's something a lot more deep behind it, whereas with this I just felt everything was surface, to the point where Glinda says in a very Valley Girlish kind of way, they're just a pair of shoes, get over it or deal with it or something like that, and let it go, that's it. And it just felt very glib, and I think the audience responded to it in that way as well, especially with there's a great scene where they slap each other, and the crowd respond like they're on Jerry Springer.
A lot of people were kind of applauding Glinda for having slapped Elphaba, and then a lot more people applauded Elphaba. But it's interesting, it's kind of divided the audience in that way. There's a bit of controversy. The Nessa thing, I just thought the politics were just totally off, really. She was a very sort of traditional Secret Garden style. And I use the word cripple advisedly because I think that's kind of the trope that was being used. And I don't mean that in a way that is to be offensive, but I think it came from an era when that sort of language was appropriate and that sort of story was appropriate. But I just couldn't quite buy that, really. Overall, then, conclusions.
Well, I was a bit disappointed. There were things, although it didn't particularly irritate me, and it was very non-offensive. It was just It was a way to while away a couple of hours, but it didn't really offer me anything more beyond that. I can't remember a memorable tune. The characters that I started off enjoying, I ended up being quite lukewarm towards. But it was all right.
It was all right. I'd probably be a little bit more generous because I do know the score a little bit, and certainly I would say that No Good Deed Goes Unpunished was was a pretty winning performance of that, and obviously I know Defying Gravity, and there's nothing you can say about it anyway that would change anyone's mind about it. And I do like it. Popular, I think, also from the first act is a classic number. There was the song Wonderful in the second half as well, which I thought had a bit of a lift to it as well. Got a good performance there from Nigel Planer. Lots of good performances of the numbers, but yeah, some of the score, as I mentioned earlier, a little generic for my tastes, certainly, compared to, for example, Into the Woods. Must finish on a positive note, though. The stagecraft in this is really extraordinary and tremendously impressive. It's impressive in a way that's a bit Vegas, I guess. I mean, stuff moves around and it's all computer controlled, and it looks terribly slick. But I do think the design has created a very sort of coherent world. Not one that necessarily is plausible or believable, but nonetheless is sort of artistically and aesthetically coherent. And it's always good to see a really I was about to say intelligent design, which which I think is a correct use of the term for once. So I now hand you over to Lisa, who has visited, or who will have visited by the time we edit this together, a performance which is the last one for most of the current London cast. So here are her, no doubt, considerably more positive thoughts on Wicked.
So here we are back at the Apollo Victoria at Wicked. For those of you who don't know me, I'm Lisa, and we've heard what Tim thinks about the show, but I'm going to tell you what I love about the show. This is now the 5th time I've seen Wicked, and tonight is actually quite a special night. I'm currently at the cast change, so we have a very excited audience in tonight, and I'm going to speak to some of them in a short while, but first of all, I'm just going to outline why I keep coming back. I really love this show. It has a fantastic plotline. The scenery, the costumes, the attention to detail is second to none, and the ensemble are absolutely phenomenal, not to mention the leading cast. The plotline is, I'll admit it has some holes in it, but if you look past it, it is a very good show as a role model for women today. There aren't enough roles where there are two strong leading ladies, and I think this is what makes this show stand out from the crowd. And looking around me tonight, I can see that it's predominantly women that are in the audience. Now, before I go on to more reasons why I love the show, I'm going to talk to two people who have come here tonight, and one of them's travelled quite a long way. We have Tally, who's from Israel, and Tanya, who's from Britain. What is it that you love especially about the show, Tanya?
I love the journey that it takes, how emotional it is, and how it's also funny, especially with songs like Popular.
And aside from the obvious, Tally, what made you want to come here tonight? What makes this show so important to you?
I don't know, the way it brings people together. I mean, everyone came here not just because of the show, but because it makes people, I don't know, sort of come together. And
I have to agree with what Tally's saying. Through this show, I have made roughly 40 new friends that I would have not met otherwise. The show is about friendship predominantly. It's about Elphaba and Glinda, who start off not liking each other and end up friends. Now, as a red-headed girl, I can assure you that I know what it's like to be the odd one out in the classroom. I didn't get asked if I eat grass, but I certainly did get asked frequently whether I ate ginger nuts and ate carrots, so I can sympathise with Elphaba. Many people feel at the end of the show that it's maybe a little bit too schmaltzy, and that, maybe Elphaba shouldn't live. What would you say to them, Tanya?
I think that for a musical, it's important that it ends somewhat happily. And I mean, if you think about it, really, I mean, if you're a kid and you're watching it, it ends happily ever after because Elphaba's alive. But I think for people who can understand the show a bit better, it's really quite a sad end, considering that Elphaba has to live away from her best friend.
Thanks for that. I have to actually agree with Tanya. Many people don't like the ending, and it is actually changed from the book and obviously the original Wizard of Oz. But without it, the show would have a very flat and disappointing ending. Knowing that Elphaba can get through all those trials and tribulations and still be okay is one of the things that makes people come back to this show time and time again. No matter how bad it gets, you're going to be okay. There's an undercurrent of politicism within the show. There's references to the great communicator, which of course many believe is a Ronald Reagan reference, and the wizard has uncanny resemblances to George Bush. Now, I'm not sure about that myself. I don't personally agree with that. I feel the underlying political message is strong enough. but at the same time it doesn't dominate the show. What does dominate the show is friendship, and that to me is what makes this show so important to me personally. My friends are very important to me, and coming back to this show I make new friends every time, and you can't deny the costumes and the sets are absolutely phenomenal. They are beautiful. They are the most astounding thing you'll see in the West End. When the time dragon starts to move at the beginning of the show and the smoke comes into his mouth, you know you're in for a good ride. You know that what you're going to see is going to be absolutely phenomenal the whole way through. Now, Tim obviously disagrees with me somewhat here and didn't enjoy the show, and that's absolutely fine. I would have to agree that maybe the show isn't for everyone. Maybe some people don't appreciate it. But personally, for me, musical theatre is all about escapism, and it doesn't come much further away from reality than this. You don't see many green people walking down the street. The Wicked Witch of the West in The Wizard of Oz does eventually die and melt and is wicked. But at the end of the day, as this show shows you, she had good reason to be. And personally, I kind of like to believe that. I like to see the good in people, and I think that's perhaps why I enjoy the show so much. This won't be the last time I come to the show, and I'm sure once I track down a few other fellow fans who love the show and are going to give their opinions, I think everyone should come and see the show before judging it. It's an experience. From the minute you walk through the doors until the curtain call, it is an experience to be enjoyed. Now, I've just found another member of the audience who's seen the show more than once. So, who are you and where have you come from to be here today?
My name is Lynn McDonald, and I'm from New Hampshire, United States of America.
So you're on holiday at the moment then?
I'm actually here on business, but yes.
So what do you think is so good about Wicked, and why do you keep coming back?
I find it interesting because people of my generation who grew up watching The Wizard of Oz every year throughout their childhood, it's a fascinating look at a different perspective of that story that we love so very, very much.
And do you think that the changed ending adds to it or takes away from the original story or just puts a new slant on it?
I really think it just puts a new slant on it. It makes you want to see the movie again and look at it from a different perspective and have maybe a little more sympathy for the person that we grew up hating so much.
Thank you very much for talking to us. So I'm standing here now at the stage door of Wicked. It's cast change night and it's 5 deep all along the stage door around me. Beside me is Emma. Now, Emma, this is your first time seeing the show. I'm a long-term fan. What did you feel about it, seeing it for the first time?
I thought it was great. I thought it was just visually fantastic. The story was great, and just the set, amazing. The songs, great. Just couldn't have asked for any better, really.
And the important question, would you come again?
Oh yeah, definitely. I think I'd have to come back and see it again, just because the first time you're so overawed by everything you see on stage that sometimes you're not really paying attention to what some of the actors are singing because you're so overawed by the stage and the set. So yeah, I think I'd have to come back again and just really watch it a bit more and learn a bit more about the characters.
That's certainly something that I've noticed. The big picture in Wicked, I've sat in several locations around the theatre, primarily the stalls, but it was only when I sat in the circle that I got the full scale of the production, the absolute attention to detail and the hugeness of it. It is a vast stage with lots of area to cover and a huge ensemble taking up that space. Of course, the lighting extends out into the theatre and that helps. Oh, somebody's obviously appeared at a window. That obviously helps with the vastness of it. If it moves to a smaller theatre, I'm not sure how it would work, but at the moment, this theatre is definitely the home for it. Standing outside, I can see green lighting, and I can see hundreds and hundreds of happy fans, many of whom have seen it many times. Before I started doing this, I sat down and I thought, what does Wicked mean to me? Now, I thought it would be an easy question to answer, and given that I've seen the show 5 times, I thought that I would be able to sit here and rattle off a list of reasons why I keep coming back, and we'll be probably going back several times more before the year is out. And the simple fact is, I absolutely love it. When I walk out the theatre after the show, I feel like my spirit is absolutely uplifted. When I think of the show, I can't help but smile. There's nothing, every single aspect of it makes me happy, and I think that's one crucial thing that theatre needs. It needs to touch your life in some way. The song For Good for me means an incredible amount, I've lost several friends for various reasons. Either we've fallen out or unfortunately through a tragic death. And For Good sums up any friendship that most of us have had. Your lives are touched and are changed by the people that you meet along the way. Fundamental thing of Wicked is that people can identify with it. Everybody has had friendships, and especially girls. We've all fallen out over boys. We've all wanted that particular boy to like us, or we've wanted to fit in. And the bottom line is that it's the story of Wicked that makes it so appealing. The first time that I ever heard a song from Wicked, it was popular, and I knew in that moment that this was a show I had to see. The first time I saw it was late last year when it had Idina Menzel, and the second that show finished, I knew that I would be coming back here. I just didn't appreciate how often. As Emma said, when you see it once, you don't catch the tiny little details. And the great thing about the show is even though I've seen it 5 times, there are still tiny little things that I pick up on each time. Now, I'm here with Joe, who's a very rare thing in this crowd tonight, in that he is male. Where are you from, Joe?
South London.
South London, so you've not had to travel far.
No.
Now, how many times have you seen Wicked? Now, be honest.
Tonight was my 5th time.
That was your 5th time. Mine too. What is it about Wicked that keeps you coming back?
It's unlike any other West End show. It's magical as well as very realistic. Like, it tackles politics, segregation for the animals, but then it also has a side where it's magical, it's witches. So adults can come and enjoy the show, and so can children. So it has its range of all different ages.
It does. There's certainly a diverse range of people, age groups, and actually a reasonable number of men, despite my earlier comment. Will you be coming again?
Of course. I'm going to be getting day tickets on Monday for Diane's first show.
Is there one thing that you think the show couldn't cope without?
It would have to be Defying Gravity.
Is that what makes the show for you?
Yes. It gives a whole sense of, now that the second half will soon be starting to completely change. It's not magical anymore, it's more serious and more dark.
Thank you very much for talking to us, Joe. I actually agree with Joe's comment about Defying Gravity. No matter how many times I see the show, I still get chills. No matter who's singing it, no matter how I'm feeling at the time, I get goosebumps as soon as I hear the Ebo and Defying Gravity. The orchestrations in this show are like nothing else in the West End, and for that alone, it's worth coming to see. The soundtrack doesn't do it justice. Don't buy the soundtrack. Come and see the show. Pay the 60 quid and see what all the fuss is about. You have to come and see it while it's here in the West End. The Apollo Victoria is the home of this show. I wouldn't wait until it moves somewhere else. Coming down the stage door line, I can tell from the large shriek that just went up from the crowd, is Musical Talk's very own Martin Ball. Now, I'm hopeful I'm going to be able to grab him on his way past for a quick word with us. How's tonight been for you?
It's been absolutely epic. I mean, it really is true what Lisa's saying. The line goes right the length of the thing, and we've been here, 45 minutes, just signing programs and everything. Yep. So I feel like, this feels like rock and roll. I feel like Bruce Goatstein, not an actor in a musical. It's extraordinary. We seem to have moved into over some strange threshold into a twilight zone.
Popular.
Well, the show is extremely popular. That's the point, isn't it? Well, you're sweet, but the whole show is. And being part of something with such momentum like this has been incredible, and it'll never happen again for me. I'm sure it won't. I mean, it's a very rare thing that happens in anyone's lifetime, and one must just enjoy every single minute of it. And I have. And people were saying today, how do you feel? And how are you feeling about leaving it? And I've been saying, sort of happy / extremely happy. Because it's just great. The whole thing's just great. And I've just had a lovely, lovely time. And not a regret or a single bad feeling about the whole thing. It's time to leave, which is great after a year. I wouldn't want to do another year. That wouldn't be natural. But it's been absolutely wonderful. And I'm sure there will be tears before bedtime.
I've spent basically my segment of the podcast telling everyone how wonderful the show is. I'm going to say that you agree?
I don't mind it.
Oh, you don't mind it?
I love the show. I want to watch it. I'm one of the few people who's never seen it.
You absolutely must watch it.
Yeah. So I'm going to wait. Obviously, all the principals who are staying I've worked with. So I'm going to wait until some covers are on and see them. Because that's going to be the fun for me, to see Sarah Earnshaw doing her Glinda. Oh, my God, and there she is by bizarre chance. Speak of the devil. Looking like clear bloody Patra. Yeah. Look, doesn't she scrub up beautifully? She does. And people who I haven't seen, mainly her actually, because I think she'd be fabulous. That really was coincidence that she came past at that moment. Totally coincidence. But that's what I want to see. I want to see other people doing the roles. That would be the fun for me. And to see the show from the front would be a blast.
It is a fantastic show. Tonight was my 5th, and I'll be coming again, no doubt. I'm
there
sure
are people here tonight on their 50th.
Oh, I know.
It's
I know.
amazing.
I've tried to speak to some of them, but they keep disappearing. They're very shy.
Yeah, okay.
I don't quite believe
I
it.
haven't got shy from them.
I don't quite believe it myself, but
no.
when it comes to putting something in recording, they're all like, oh no, I'm not admitting it. I'm sure you're going to have a big night tonight, though, and there might be headaches tomorrow.
I would be very disappointed if I'm not extremely hungover in the morning, yeah.
I'd be disappointed if you weren't too.
This is a night where we really can kick back and have a drink.
Good.
And celebrate, the friendships that have been made and this extraordinary experience that we're sharing out here on this stage door, with these millions of people. I don't know how many people there are, but there could be 1,000.
I've never seen anything like it. Anyone stuck a head out the window and the place went berserk.
I did, and I got video footage.
Oh, did you?
Yes.
Oh, wonderful. We'll look forward to that.
I'd YouTube it if I knew how to, but maybe I'll give it to someone who can YouTube it.
I know how to do it.
Because it was a good view. All right, okay, I'll give it to you.
I'll give you a hand.
Yeah, okay, I'll give it to you. Yeah.
Well, I'll let you go because you've been very patient dealing with going down the line.
No, not patient. It's a privilege and a pleasure and, frankly, a thrill. It's really super.
Well, we've really enjoyed going through the last year with you, and we look forward to seeing you in other things soon.
Thank you, Lisa.
Have a great night.
I'm not a great musical person. It's probably it for me with musicals, but never mind. But thank you for having me anyway. Bless you.
Right, okay, you've now heard the case for the prosecution, the case for the defence. Those are my views and Darren's, and you've heard Lisa's as well. We're now all together. We thought we'd have the Great Wicked Debate just to conclude the episode, just to make some points to and fro about it. Is it a wonderful musical, or is it merely popular? I'm going to start with Darren is here, Nick is here, and Lisa is here as well. I'm going to start with my case for the prosecution, which is that although I think it's enormously well crafted, I think there's a certain lack of depth in the thing. I think certain characters where you might expect a little bit more development, where you might expect more to happen with them, more subtlety, you actually just get a lot of full-on almost emotional blackmail almost. It's like, it just hits the high notes that it knows it needs to hit in order to buzz the brain in a certain way. And I, a little bit cynical from that point of view. So what would your reaction be, Lisa?
I think certainly some of the characterizations are particularly one-dimensional. You perhaps would expect more. I know the characters a bit better because I read the book first. The book is nothing like the musical, which we've discussed before in the podcast. At the end of the day, though, it is a 3-hour show. How much characterization do you expect? You can't expect a full life history or a full 3-dimensional character.
I would say in 3 hours, I would expect quite a lot, actually. That would be my accusation. In support of your argument, one could offer The Lord of the Rings, which offers pretty much no character development in 3 hours, and so, yeah, okay, that's fair. But, in other shows, they certainly do manage to do it.
I have to say, there's such a mix of classed as principal characters and a really strong ensemble. So in order for you to actually fully characterise every principle, so to speak. For example, if you were to fully characterise Dr. Dillerman, you'd be there forever. What's his background as an animal? What's his history in animal rights? You could actually make an entire sub-musical about how the animals are treated, or Bok, what it's like being persecuted as a munchkin. So I think in the way they've done it, they've taken Elphaba and Glinda, and there's enough with those two. There's enough surrounding them to make the show. That show is those two. Fiyero comes in and out, Dillerman again in and out, and Nessa Rose and Bok, they're all just on the edges, and I think the characterization of Elphaba and Glinda is actually strong enough to get away with it. I don't think they're as flat as you perhaps think they are.
Okay, Darren, do you have a reaction?
Yeah, I think that's a strong case for killing your darlings then. If there are so many characters that you can't dedicate time to them, I think there's a good case of stripping it down and focusing on the characters that we are supposed to care about the most. There was so much, it was very, very rich, and that was one of the positives. I thought it was very, very rich. The way it looked was very, very sumptuous, but it didn't service the story particularly. If the story was Elphaba and Glinda, having everything in there was to the detriment of the story because they tried to keep so much still in there. I think they were trying to be very faithful to the source, and it suffered because of that. So
it was kind of the survey issue. Sorry, Lisa, you want to come back on that?
It's not faithful at all to the source. They completely changed the book. The two are nothing like each other.
Right.
Okay, you can put the Wicked logo on the cover of the book and sell it as Wicked the book. But if you give that to your kid, heaven help you, because it's nothing like the show. The two are very different, and I think they've got enough of the basic plot line from the book into the musical, but it's certainly not true to the source.
I want to pick up on a point that Darren was making, which is about how the stagecraft supports the story, because I think that some of the spectacle that you get in it, I mean, there are many shows that have spectacle, but the spectacle is often justified in terms of like the themes of the thing, or it's, there are good reasons why certain things happen, unlike, for the sake of argument, a certain dragon that I saw in the thing as a piece of stagecraft. I mean, Nick, you must have a view on that.
That is the sort of one bit that is coherent to the book, I think, because I haven't read the book. Lisa, if you can correct me, the time dragon clock is actually mentioned in the musical, and the whole story takes place inside this travelling clock with a dragon on top that overlooks everything. And
why?
I do actually think the dragon is perhaps an unnecessary expenditure. The time dragon theme is much more prevalent in the book. There's a nod to it in I think it's something like the third strike of the time dragon clock, which was melted. That's actually the only reference. And yes, there's a clock face background, but I'm not sure what value the actual dragon has, even as a frequent goer. It's there.
I know the clock motif within the set, Stephen Schwartz told me, is all to do with the inner workings of the wizard's mind, how it's all very mechanical. You can actually see people pulling the dragon and the strings and the pulleys and the cogs that turn round when sets move and things.
Once, do you care about that?
No, but, I guess if you...
I would also question whether that's in any way... if that's in the book or if it's in the songs or anything like that. I mean, there's no sort of talk in there about the workings of minds. It's all about perception, and it's all about... I mean, if you're bringing themes out of the thing, it's definitely about perception. It's who looks popular, which leaders were popular, and he kind of repeats that in the Wonderful Song and so on. So, I mean, there's that running through it, but I didn't really see that expressed per se in the stagecraft. We didn't have, communist iconography or whatever, Stalinist type of statues or things like that.
Did have... I mean... There's a bit which always reminds me of Nazis, is when the two people come out with the lion cub and they take their hat off and you see a very sort of Hitler-esque haircut. Do you think that's...
tenuous, in my opinion, but Lisa?
It's actually... I actually find that very kind of secret police, Nazi, Gestapo, kind of the way they've done it with the trench coats, with the hats. It's a very strong image that you're used to seeing in films as, people get spirited away by these people in trench coats. So I actually think that's quite a strong image from that point of view.
I think they did try to do quite a lot of politics in the show. I wasn't always comfortable with how they did that. The personal politics of the disabled sister is one issue I had a big problem with, and then the sort of the nod towards what I felt the wizard was a sort of a George Bush kind of character.
Well, that is from the book, though, because Gregory Maguire wrote the entire book around the whole iconography of how Saddam Hussein went from being nothing to being this greatly persecuted person in the media.
As an audience now, though, it's very hard not to read George Bush. It's how I think a lot of people would approach the text. We're not necessarily going to think of Saddam Hussein anymore, I don't think.
Well, I think you're agreeing, Dave. I think it sounds like basically you're making the same substantive point. I do want to talk about this politics of disability in it a bit, because I found that a bit troublesome. Actually, I found it a bit offensive. We talk a bit about that in the review. Nessa Rose is inert. She's miserable because she's disabled, and that's pretty much her entire character up to a certain point. She's passive, and I think that's a portrayal of disability that I thought we'd grown out of quite a long time ago. So I don't know if you have views on that.
It's not something that I've ever probably sat and gone, I find that quite offensive. I think it's dealt with it's not sensitively handled. I'll say that straight off the bat. It really isn't. It's not something I deal with in my day-to-day life, but perhaps if I did, I would have a problem with it. They have definitely toned it down from the book. I mean, the book's... it's not nice, but the book is much darker. So I think this is their way, and in a way, it is acceptable. If you think about the films in the 40s, 50s, you've got that stereotypical passive. It's an image that we're used to. So it's from that point of view, they probably think they can get away with it.
Well, that's exactly the problem, I think, and they think they can get away with it. And in my case, they certainly didn't. And I don't think it's just an appropriate thing to be showing anymore.
Yeah, but you have a nice special effect when the wheelchair moves on its own.
Yeah, you haven't really sold me on that one.
what is your view on the ending?
Yeah, I think the ending's a bit of a cop-out. I think that they don't follow through what really ought to be a tragedy to its logical conclusion. Because, you know, if you know the film, which obviously we all pretty much do, actually I don't that well, but anyway, you're aware that, you know, she does end up bad, and she turns bad, and all of this work is done in order to kind of make plausible her reasons for turning bad, which I think it's a very hard thing to make succeed, and I don't think the show does succeed in doing it. But if she's going to be rescued and it's all going to be sappy at the end, then I think you've kind of wasted all that effort making her into a tragic character and then not giving her a tragic ending. What a shame.
From my point of view, at the end of that 3 hours, if she hadn't come out that trap door, I think I would have walked out of the theatre in the hugest huff. Because I think at the end of the day, you go to the theatre to escape how tragic and terrible the world is. And if after 3 hours and all that, she was dead, I was like, why have I just paid 60 quid and sat here? I could have watched The Wizard of Oz again and got that.
But I think if it had been a noble sacrifice, it's quite a nice thing to see, and I think that is escapist, something noble to happen.
But you've got to remember that the key demographic for this show is the teen to sort of, my age, the mid-20s, and I have to say, from a chick flick point of view, you can't beat it when she comes out that trap door.
But can I just sort of suggest a counter-argument to that, which is that, of course, you know, West Side Story, very famously, doesn't end... I'm sorry if I'm giving this away, listeners, but it doesn't end all that well. And that's actually very rewarding, cathartic, whatever you want to call it, you know, in the sense of... You know that it has to end up in a very tragic way, and that in itself is dramatically satisfying. It's not like you have to have a happy ending just to justify the ticket. In fact, of course, if they copped out in West Side Story, you'd also walk out, surely.
Well, if they copped out in West Side Story, it would be ridiculous. But I just feel with Wicked, you've got For Good, which is towards the end, which is so heart-wrenching. I mean, very rarely do I survive it without a tear in my eye. I think maybe they could get away without it at the ending, but certainly it does give you something where you walk out the theatre and you do actually feel a bit better about it, and you think, you know what, she's had a horrible time. You know, she's been picked on, she's been bullied. I've got strong red hair, so I know exactly how that feels. And you know, to know that at the end of the day she's okay, she's got the guy and she's fine, she's going to go off and have a life and she'll be fine, it's kind of reassuring to the girls in that audience. Whereas if she goes through all that and she ends up dead, it's kind of like, well, what's the point? Why should I bother fighting anything?
That's interesting, actually. Yes, I wonder if the philosophical perspective is different. I always quite like the things where the people die, but then that's just my twisted psychology. Who knows? Other points to make? Any other things? What else did you say that might convince us?
I'm just wondering, do you think Wicked would work with a minimal black box staging, with no sets and no flying and no piano?
What do you think, Darren?
For me, it would lose the only reason that it was worth watching, which that sounds terribly harsh, but for me, that's the reason I could keep watching, was because the stagecraft was so good, because the costumes were so good. And I've got to say, I think we didn't mention this enough, but the performances were uniformly excellent all the way through. And I think if it was stripped back to basics, I think we'd lose something there. I don't think it would work.
I certainly think as soon as you walk through those doors at the Apollo Victoria, you know what you're in for. You're in Oz, you've got your green, you've got everything, and then you walk down into this. If you're in the stalls, you walk into stalls, you've got all the lighting around you and stuff. You know what you're in for, and I think that makes a complete experience. Okay, that sounds a bit theme parky, but certainly it really, really works with a show like this where you've got so much to look at. And I'm not sure. Because the Emerald City is so, you know, in your face and fantastic in the movie, to then not have that in the show, you'd be like, oh, so what's so great about it without the great costumes, the great lighting and settings?
Well, let's remember who the producers are of this first, and that's why they're so good at what they're doing here with Universal and their whole theme park experience. But what I'm saying is, do you think it's strong enough for the story for these characters to survive without having fantastic lighting, fantastic 3D? I'm not saying it's bad. Of course, I love the orchestrations, but just having these words and the words, basically. I
think that for me, Oz was certainly in the first half. Oz was only there in the way it looked. It could have been set in an American high school or a British public school. I think they did try and make some concessions there. I didn't feel there was anything particularly magical. Okay, we have the storyline of the animal teacher, and obviously that's, you're not going to get that regularly in a British public school, but it just felt allegorical rather than anything magical, and I felt it was like watching something like Bring It On or Mean Girls or something like that in the early stages of the first half.
It's a chick flick?
To a point, yeah. it pains me to say it, but we'll be seeing the show for the 5th time soon, and I go time after time, and it is predominantly females in the audience who are online and make the most fuss about it at the end of the day.
Do you think it was worth putting the politics that they put in there? If it's primarily a chick flick, was it worth doing that?
I think it is, because if you took away the politics, then is purely meaningless fluff. And much as I love it, if it was meaningless fluff, I wouldn't be going for the 5th time.
No.
Splendid. Okay, well, if you have views on the debate, as I'm sure most of our listeners do, on one side of the fence or another, please do take them to the discussion boards at www.musicaltalk.co.uk, and we look forward to hearing from you and continuing the debate. And I look forward to all the hate mail I'm going to receive for not having liked this, of course, very wonderful musical. Okay, or popular musical. I say popular, others say wonderful. Thank you very much for joining us this week on Musical Talk, and we look forward to talking to you next week, where we'll be back to fully edited episodes. Hooray!
This has been a production of Musical Talk. Copyright 2007.